2 of the new year. So how are your New Year's resolutions going? For many people, one resolution is to give up alcohol for at least a month. NBC's Vince Sims has more now on what's called Dry January.
Inside 811 Place in Frisco.
It's basically a Cosmo, and then you top it off with sparkling wine.
Bartender and manager Mary Lee has been busy this holiday season.
I would say that it probably starts around the beginning of November.
But for some people, the New Year, New Me mantra means leaving alcohol behind. It's called Dry January. Many people take the month off from alcohol after all the holiday celebrations.
Well, I think the New Year's is always a good time for a new start, a new beginning.
John Edmondson is a licensed professional counselor. He says participating in Dry January can help you assess if you drink too much.
It's a great time to stop and check and see maybe I need to take a step back from that. Taking a month off allows you that opportunity to really have a clear point of view.
He also points out health benefits.
Studies have proven that if you take a month off from drinking, it's really going to improve your health. People begin to lose weight, they feel better, their mind is much more clear. And throughout the year, they tend to drink a little bit less.
More of the restaurants I have, the menus actually have a zero proof section now.
Even though Lee makes a living serving alcohol, she thinks some time off from it is okay.
Because I think people go overboard sometimes, especially during the holidays when you go overboard with eating and all that other stuff. So it's the same thing, just kind of detoxing yourself at the beginning of the year.
During your Dry January, you can find other ways to fill your extra time with other hobbies or exercise. In Frisco, Vince Sims, NBC5.
And a recent poll found 14% of adults plan to take part in Dry January.
When I think of Dry January,
it's weather related.
I think of drought or, lack of snow.
Right.
All right, you ready for this?
Yes.
I need you really focused, all right? Because this is what we do. You've watched this. We're going to gather round, clowns. Michael Moulton, M to the Rock, coming to you live from Dallas, Texas, from the DFW Coin and Jewelry Studio, home of M to the Rock, brought to you by, there it is, Healing Springs Ranch. We're on the 392nd floor overlooking downtown Dallas. Okay, we work an honest program. I'm joking. We're not. But actually, it felt like I fell 392 floors. Welcome to the new studio.
It's wonderful.
The Healing Springs DFW Coin and Jewelry Studio. Now, that's what I fell from, way up there.
That's
right where you're sitting. I was laying.
That's up there.
That's up there. So 14 feet. So welcome to the show. We got a great show. What is up with this right here? I may be due for a haircut. Look at if you just like pat that thing back. It just keeps falling down right in my face. Melissa Caldwell-Engle. Oh, gosh, we got another one of those guests. Every one of my lady guests that come on this show, you're like a diva superstar, like all the superstars I have. 3 names. Melissa Caldwell-Engle. We have all these great people on the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you're here. Clinical director, co-founder, MS, LPC, ATR, all sorts of great stuff of Healing Springs Ranch.
Yes.
Healing Springs Ranch, 1 hour north of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, residential treatment, right? Mm-hmm. That's how we say it. Residential treatment is 1 hour north, and I will be there tomorrow. Tomorrow is No Trippin' Thursday. I go live in the car as I'm driving up there, and I just have a great time coming out there. And
every week.
Oh, I love it. Every week I'm up there, and they help me. So I always say, y'all let me come up there and work with y'all, and I have so much fun. So, but before we get into tonight's show, tomorrow night, Amara Durham will be in studio here at M to the Rock. You don't want to miss that show. And Cynthia Smoot, we had Cynthia Smoot last night. Great job. We talked about control, giving up control to be free.
Right.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about that. So tell us about, now you've been doing this for how many years?
Going on about 30.
Well, tell us just a little bit. Who are you? Who are you, and how did we meet, and all that good stuff?
So, okay. So and the reason I go by Caldwell is because I have been in this industry for so long, and I got married later in life, and so many people knew me as Melissa Caldwell.
I get it, yeah.
But I started out, I'm a registered art therapist, so I had a master's in art therapy, and I have a master's in clinical psychology.
I didn't know about the art. Okay, yes. Good. Okay.
So I started out in school studying fine arts, but then decided I loved psychology and heard about art therapy, and then did both of those.
Okay.
Combined both of those. And so I started out, I also have I'm also a licensed professional counselor, an LPC.
Okay.
And so I have a private practice. But where my career started, I did my internship years ago. Do you remember the charters? They used to have charter hospitals.
Yeah.
So I started with charter, and I started working with a psychiatrist there who specialized in treating people that struggled with trauma.
Okay.
So adult survivors of childhood trauma.
Okay.
And they had a trauma program. And so I worked with him for about, 25 years, I think is what we added up. And I helped him open up different facilities across the United States. They're actually still operating. There's one in Michigan, one in L.A., and one in Denton here. And it is for adult survivors of childhood trauma. And so since it's a program that's inpatient, so my experience has been in inpatient private psychiatry.
Okay.
Inpatient hospitals. And we started out at Charter. We moved to another company. But what I learned is that when you work with people, and the program is called the trauma program, it wasn't named after a diagnosis. It wasn't an eating disorder program. It wasn't an addiction program. It wasn't a dual diagnosis program. It wasn't general adult psych. It was called the trauma program. And what that meant is if you could come to this program if you struggled with your being able to function, and if your mental health issues were so severe that you needed inpatient treatment.
Right.
So I had every diagnosis under the sun. I worked with people who had major depression, PTSD, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, dissociative disorders, and then every addiction under the sun. So the core focus is the reason they're there is because of their trauma. And what you learned is that
Did you know that when you very first started that? Because you said that so freely. The core focus of why they're there is because of their trauma.
Yes, and that was what Dr. Ross was all about, was helping people heal from. Now, what's interesting is he started treating dissociation. And what is that? Dissociation is, in the old world, you would hear it explained as multiple personality disorder.
Okay.
And so that's an extreme side of dissociation. So dissociation's on a spectrum. On the low end of the spectrum, you and I dissociate all the time. If we're driving to work and you're thinking about something else and you wind up there and you think, gosh, I don't even remember making that turn, there's a little bit of a dissociation.
Is that called daydreaming?
Daydreaming is a form of dissociation.
Okay.
So there's normal dissociation.
Okay.
And it's just kind of a way where we disconnect from being totally present, and our mind can wander. So that's on the normal side of dissociation. Daydreaming, watching a movie and someone calls your name and has to repeat it several times. Like, oh, yes.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of like
checking out.
Yes,
okay.
Getting lost for a moment. That's normal dissociation. But on the far end of the continuum would be used to be called multiple personality disorder.
Okay.
It's now called dissociative identity disorder.
Okay.
And that's on the further end of the spectrum. And when I first met Dr. Ross, he specialized in treating dissociative disorders. And so that was his area of specialty. So the unit actually started, it was called the dissociative disorder unit. And so it was named after a diagnosis when we first started. But as we started working, the problems that people were struggling with, a lot of other people had the exact same problems. And it's because they had trauma. So we had people with PTSD. And the people that had dissociative disorders also had all kinds of addictions, eating disorders, all kinds of process addictions. So it was a very complicated psychiatric. It was just dual diagnosis we thought would be easy. These folks that we were working with had 5, 6, 7 different diagnoses because of the severe trauma.
Okay.
So over time, as our treatment and our program continued to grow, we had a lot of people saying, can I please be on that in the program, because I've had a lot of trauma and I can really relate to the people in the program. So then we finally said, you know what we're learning is it's not about the dissociative disorder per se, it's about the trauma, and the underlying trauma that's not been dealt with or is not resolved. You'll see it. It's kind of like it's the hub, and there's all these spokes that come off of that.
Right.
And it can be an eating disorder. It can be cocaine addiction. It can be alcohol. It can be anxiety. It can be... So all of these different symptoms we were seeing were results of unresolved trauma. So then we just called it the trauma program. If you've had any kind of unresolved trauma, you're welcome to come to this program. So what it taught me was when you're looking at adult psych and you're looking at people that struggle with addictions, there are differences, because obviously someone who struggles with alcoholism and someone who struggles with bipolar disorder or dissociative disorder or major depression, you can see the differences in the symptomology of those diagnoses. That's not hard to see. But when you really start looking at where the healing and recovery comes to play and what good treatment is about, it's about the similarities. And they all have the same thing in common. They all had painful childhood experiences that they had suppressed. They couldn't deal with it. They had to push it away, and they just tried to deny the pain. And the drinking and substance use is a way to try to help keep that pain pushed down. As odd as it sounds, so can depression, so can anxiety. Those are actually symptoms of an underlying core issue. And when I was in school, they said, you should ask yourself, what problem does this symptom solve? It doesn't matter if it's psychosis. It doesn't matter if it's drinking, gambling, depression, anxiety, PTSD. What problem does this symptom solve? Because these symptoms are there for a reason. So what I learned early on is we can get so focused on the differences in these symptoms and these diagnoses and how people present themselves. And some people could say, oh, well, I would never do that. I just struggle with this. Or I would never stick a needle in my arm. I mean, I just smoke a little weed.
Right.
So everybody has all these reasons why we're different.
Right.
But when you look at what's driving those symptoms, we're all the same. It's about running from pain.
So this is good stuff. So we're talking about trauma here, okay? And then as you're that's kind of the hub of the wheel, and we have these different spokes that go out from the hub.
Yes.
And they can be different forms of addictions to try to relieve the trauma. And that goes into, me and my personal story is, why do I do the things I do?
Right.
Why do I continue to drink alcohol and do drugs? And I say I'm going to quit, and I'm powerless over it, and I end up drunk and high 2 days later,
Right.
And then you start telling me all these tricks, and so it really gets convoluted, okay? So let's take a step back for 1 second. Let me ask you this. Is addiction a disease?
Well, that may be another show.
Okay.
But it depends on what
because you draw the difference. Can you take a person with no trauma, and can they be an alcoholic and a drug addict?
So what I would say, I'm going to speak from my experience as a clinician.
Was that a fair question?
Yes,
okay.
And it's a question that comes up often.
Okay.
And people get pretty. People have strong opinions about that specific question.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say to people is, it really depends on what disease. How do you define disease?
Mm-hmm.
What does disease mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
And if you think it means it's primarily genetic, the research, and I know this goes against what a lot of people have heard.
No, come on, this is good.
The research doesn't support that it is a disease, not in the classic sense of how we think of diseases. If you think of disease as being primarily genetic driven, the research doesn't support that it is a disease.
Mm-hmm.
The DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is kind of the Bible of psychiatry,
right. Even
in our most recent DSM, it says that there's about 200 different genes that are involved with schizophrenia, bipolar, major depression, and addictions, alcoholism. So this search that we've been trying to find, the search we've been on to try to find the gene, the more that we advance in science and technology, the more we start to try to find the gene for major depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, substance use. When we try to find the gene, we're realizing it's more and more and more. So now they're looking at 200 different genes.
Okay.
Since the DSM was published, this most recent one, the science is now supporting, they say it's around 1,000 genes. The National Institute of Mental Health no longer is willing to fund research to try to find the gene behind any diagnoses in the DSM.
Interesting.
So it depends on how you define disease. If you want to make it be primarily genetic, I would say no. But if for you disease means it's something that affects the brain, it affects your chemistry, how you are chemically, then yes.
Yeah.
So it depends on how you define disease. What's interesting is trauma affects the brain. And there's enough studies out there that talk about, and we've done enough studies and have enough research now, that people that have had severe trauma, there's certain parts of their brain that are smaller.
Okay.
So it affects your anatomy, it affects your chemistry. And the cool thing is, they're showing now that through different types of therapy, parts of your brain that are smaller can actually start to grow, which was unheard of. When I was in school 35 years ago, you were always told, take care of your neurons, those suckers don't come back.
Right.
Don't screw them up, don't
Right.
lose them. But they're actually showing that the way you think can actually cause the anatomy of your brain, certain parts to grow.
And what's that look like, the way you think to make your brain grow?
I don't know that they know the specifics of how all the details that it works, but there are new neuronal connections that take place. And science has come along enough that we can actually do a PET scan or an MRI to show the activity in the brain in areas that wasn't normally there. And we can show parts of the brain. There's the amygdala. There's different parts of the brain that they have shown with trauma survivors, so people that had PTSD, that part of their brain actually got bigger. So trauma can cause an atrophy. It can make it smaller. And you can actually do recovery work and change the way you think. And that's part of biofeedback. You can change your heart rate. You can change a lot of what's going on with your body. Now you can change the anatomy. So parts of the brain that were smaller, they saw that actually grew and increased in size.
So psychotherapy, group therapy, meetings, going to meetings, that will stimulate that and grow the brain bigger where it was smaller.
Yes. That is, now, here's the thing that would be interesting. If trauma affects the brain, should we start calling trauma a disease?
I like that.
Because the part that I totally agree with the disease model, and I have to be careful because people kind of panic and say, "Oh my gosh, this lady's saying she doesn't believe it's a disease. Of course it's a disease." I just want us to not continue providing information to support an argument that isn't there. Like the research doesn't support it.
Right.
But the word disease, different people have different definitions for it. If you want to look at it's affected the brain, it's affected your chemistry, and we're calling that a disease, I'm fine with that. But the same would hold true for trauma. People have been through trauma. So you almost would want to say, well, then trauma is a disease, which sounds kind of funny to word it that way. Whatever we call it, the wonderful news is, well, let's start with the sad news. The sad news is pain, unresolved trauma, holding feelings in, suppressing your emotions, having PTSD, struggling with anxiety, struggling with the depression, affects our brain and affects our chemistry.
Yes.
So does addictions. Now, I don't know necessarily which came first and how they overlap. I know there is overlap.
Interesting point there, yeah.
So it is there. That's the good news is we can change it, but it does affect our brain.
So let me ask you. You shared something at a group that I was at with you, and it touched me, it affected me, and I couldn't wait to get you back on the show. And you let's talk about the word pain, okay, and how the brain processes pain. Talk to our viewers about that, how the brain processes pain from a broken leg to hurt feelings, how that works, and kind of walk through, the two examples of a man that is affected by trauma and a man that's not affected, has trauma issues, and they break their leg and they go get opiates at the emergency room.
Okay.
I love when you share that. I'm doing it wrong, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about, because quite often I'll have people say to me, why is it that we don't, and they'll say, we don't know what the hook is. We don't know why some people can take opiates and it grabs them, and other people can take it and they just take it as prescribed and they're done with it and they
My
move
dad
on.
broke his leg and he was fine, and he goes to the emergency room. Now he's shooting up heroin in the back of an alley 2 years later, and we cannot get him off opiates.
Yes.
And that is real talk. The opiate epidemic.
Yes.
Okay, share us with that, how the brain processes pain.
Well, so what I have learned, what I have seen when I look at people that have, so you could take two people, had the same injury, they both go in, they have the same kind of surgery, they're put on the same medication, same dosage, same weight. You can get it as close as you can. And why does one person, as their body heals and they no longer need the opiates to help with the pain, managing the pain in their physical body, as their body heals, they don't need it anymore, versus the other person who their body's healed and the doctor's like, your leg is fine. You don't need this anymore. And sometimes the person will even experience and say, no, the pain's still there. And the doctor's like, I cannot figure out why. It looks totally fine. So they actually still experience physical pain. And then some people will say, I don't know what it was that happened to me, but when I took that opiate or when I took that medication, I felt real for the first time. I felt like I was comfortable in my own skin. I don't know how to describe it, but it was just like the real me became more present, and it was it's just who I was meant to be. I finally connected with my real self. Yes. Yeah. It was such a relief.
Something happened.
Yes.
Right.
And so people say, well, there has to be something genetic that grabbed that person. I'm not going to say genetics don't play a role in some of this. It'd be silly to say it's not involved at all. But the way that we're taught, and even in my graduate programs, we're told that it's genetics and then there's environment. And I'm simply saying, I'm not saying genetics isn't there, but I would say I think it's more genetics and it's environment. So I'm just learning there's a lot more environment influences.
And what does that mean? When you say environment, I think I know what you're saying, but what does that look like?
It could be our experiences growing up. Environment's anything that we're connected with, something. It doesn't have to be organic. It doesn't have to be something genetic inside. It can be the food you eat. It can be the people you're around, the experiences that you're exposed to. If there's trauma, if you had loving, nurturing parents, if you had parents that were struggling with their own addiction, that's all part of our environment. Mm-hmm. So I just lost my train of thought. What was...
We were talking about how the body, the brain treats pain. It just recognizes it as pain.
This is called menopause, just so you know. I'm just telling you. I used to think it was an excuse. It's
Open
not.
that door so I can get out of here if I need to.
So what I've learned with the people where it grabs them and they feel so good, what I've learned is when you start talking to these folks, there's a lot of painful experiences that they had that they have suppressed. And the number one thing we do, if we don't know how to manage painful feelings, we just try to kind of push it away and keep on going.
Yes, we bury it, stuff it.
And just because you stuff feelings doesn't mean they go away. They're still there, because feelings are actually energy, and that energy and that frequency, the energy stays in us. So just because you turn a blind eye to it literally and say, I'm not going to think about that, and you shove it down, it gets stored in our subconscious. And if you store enough stuff back there, it starts to put pressure on your psyche. And now some people have stored it so good they don't even realize, oh, it's because of that situation that I'm feeling this kind of this discomfort or this anxiety. Some people have pushed it so far back they don't even know what or why, but they can feel kind of this restlessness.
Right.
And they don't know why. So over time, it starts to even affect how you feel about yourself. You're just like, I don't feel good in my own skin. I just feel restless. And you take that opiate, and it soothes the body, and it soothes the mind. And so they're getting relief not just from the physical pain, but they're getting relief from a lot of stuff that has been buried in their subconscious that's starting to kind of push on them. And it's a relief that is that stuff in their subconscious settles and it rests.
Yes.
And so when people get grabbed by the opiates and they can't let it go and they don't know why, and why do some people still need it and other people don't, it's because it's soothing more than just the physical pain. It's soothing a lot of this emotional pain that has been buried. And I find that every single time.
So true. I mean, I remember that. I remember as a very young kid when I was 10 years old, when alcohol hit my body, I remember that feeling.
Yes.
I remember that feeling. I don't remember any sort of feeling when I ate my first Snickers. You know, It wasn't like a spiritual awakening, but something happened when alcohol hit my body. And when you share this, it just really hits home with me. And it's amazing. So the way that when I copy what you say, when I share it with people, it's basically, you get a guy that goes into the hospital that's got no trauma and is spiritually fit, working a program, living on life's terms. It happens. He's that guy that they give him a prescription of opiates, and he takes one. He's like, done. I don't need it anymore. Because I want to move forward and get going. And you take someone like me who has so much trauma. And there's a lot of fear, a lot of pain, a lot of anxiety, all this stuff that I have, and I take it and it's, and guess what? You dang right my leg still hurts. And I'll lie. Exactly. I will lie and say my leg still hurts and take more. So once you shared that, and when I did break my leg, I could not wait to get a hold of you, because when they administered pain medication, when I was in the emergency room, there was no euphoria. None at all.
Why do you think that happened?
I think that because, and we've had Joe Powell on before, because I was going to take the stance on MAT, medically assisted treatment, and how do you stand for that? The Suboxone, methadone, all that, that's a whole other show. But he made it real clear to me, when my recovery is here, MAT goes here. As long as MAT's lower than my recovery, the drugs go away.
So he didn't have the power.
Didn't have the power. All the way to the point where my program is today. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not condoning anything. So seek your doctor. But I don't take antidepressants today. I take nothing today because my recovery is so much here, it's gone. And my reaction to things of fear, anxiety, I know what's happening. I know what's happening, and I know what the solution is.
Well, you've gotten connected to your body
That's
again.
it, yes.
And you have to. And if you're disconnected from your body, you don't even know when you're feeling these things. You just know there's this restlessness, and you can't settle it, or there's this depression, and you can't figure out why.
Right.
So there is a natural. So when you said earlier, I tell them, people will say to themselves, I'll never do it again. I've had all these horrible things happen. I've lost my job. I've lost my marriage. I've lost custody of my children. I've lost my good legal standing. I've lost all these things because of a substance. They know what they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
They know. People,
right.
They know. It's not about your intellect.
Well, and we call it in our world insanity. The insanity comes in. I know what's happening. I know what to do. And if I choose to seek these visible things to fix my invisible problem, I know what the result's going to be, and I still do it.
Well, so what's interesting was when people will say, and I'll ask when I'm doing group at Healing Springs, does anybody not know why they're here? Everybody's like, hello. Everybody knows why they're there.
Yeah.
Say, okay, so you're doing this,
right.
or you're doing this, or you're doing this, or whatever. Right. If you're doing those things, that's a behavior. You know that it's destroying your life. All these areas are affected. Your good legal standing, marriages, jobs, families, careers.
Consequences.
Yes. You know that.
Right.
Why can't you stop doing this?
Come on. So when you say that to me as an addict alcoholic, and when I'm in the disease is what our language is, when I'm in the disease, that makes me so angry.
It should.
And you know why it makes me angry? Because I don't know why I'm doing it. And that's why it made me angry.
It could make you angry too, because you know it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, but I literally don't know why. Why, Melissa, when I sit here and I promise you on my life, I'm not going to drink today. And I mean it.
I believe it.
And you believe me, and I'm drunk and high 4 hours later.
I will ask people, I will say to them, how many of you feel like your body has a mind of its own? How many of you feel like because what happens is literally the body is in such a desperate state. So if I had a car wreck, God forbid, there's something wood around here, and I broke my femur, and my leg is injured, and the paramedics come in, and they rush in, and I'm screaming in pain. Right. They're going to give me morphine. They're going to give me something to stop the pain.
To manage the pain.
Yes, and nobody's going to look at me and say, oh, now hang on, don't give that to her. Lady, seriously, take some deep breaths. I think you're overreacting. You need to pray a little bit more. This is really weak character. Nobody would do that. Everybody understands when it's physical pain like that. Everybody gets it. The desperation to make that pain stop. And you get desperate and you get urgent to make that pain stop. The brain does not know the difference between physical pain and emotional pain.
There we go. That's what I wanted to hear.
So
say that again.
The brain does not know the difference between physical pain and emotional pain.
Okay, there's the catch. All right.
So, and Dr. Gabor Mate talks about that a lot and writes about that in his books. So if the brain doesn't know the difference, when you have that kind of emotional pain come up, there's an urgency to be able to make that stop. You're going to do whatever you can to make that stop. But people don't understand it. People don't understand that behind the desperate need for numbing agents, they think it's just about your character or poor impulse control or not being spiritual enough. It is 100% that there's pain that person's trying to get away from, and it's just as urgent when it's in your emotional, in your heart, as it is when it's in your body.
Right. And from an addict speaking, this is that when I took the medicine for the first time and we talked about something happened and let me throw this at you. The way that I felt and that pain, the trauma pain went away, the emotional pain went away, as well as my leg pain go away. And I started feeling different and relaxed, okay? I felt like I arrived. You know what I really felt like? So this is how y'all feel all the time.
Aww.
This is how y'all feel all the time. This is what I see. I see y'all acting in life. This is how y'all feel. So I have finally found something that I can take, administer on a daily basis to feel normal. Because I do have a mental problem, but I'm not going to say anything to anybody. That's where I would go with this. This is where, and to the point where I was eating so much Adderall that I was like going, how does the world not take this medicine? How do y'all live without Adderall? I mean, that's how sick that I would get.
Well, that's how much pain you had down inside.
Yes.
You had to manage that to be able to be free enough to be yourself.
Right. So with all this, so we address this. We're getting honest, okay, and all that. We go to Healing Springs. What's the solution? What is the solution for the loved one who is really struggling, strung out? Their life is completely unmanageable as a result of drugs and alcohol. We'll get into process addiction here in a little bit. But so what is the solution to that? Number one, we detox them.
Right.
We address the body.
Right.
Administer emergency help.
Right.
Which Healing Springs, we don't offer detox. Is that correct?
No, we do not.
We don't offer detox. And then once they come into residential treatment, what is our solution? What's the basic things that we address?
Well, there's a lot of things that we address, but the core piece of it would be we explain to our clients there, and I'll say to them, listen, everybody's here because you're in pain.
Yeah.
Here's what I know about you just walking in the door. You're a very sensitive person. You feel things very deeply. You probably are a stuffer, someone that just holds things in. Mm-hmm. And if you've had some painful experiences from your past that has just kind of, you're up to here with a lot of pain, you keep it to yourself, you stuff it in, and you're highly sensitive, you're going to feel it very deeply. And you've resorted to different behaviors, including substances, to try to manage that pain. Mm-hmm. And so what we have to learn while we're here, for starters, is number one, this isn't a character defect in the sense that there's something wrong with you.
We're not bad people.
Yes, that's what I mean by that.
Right, we're sick. Yeah.
Yes, and that and the first thing is we've got to start healing some of that pain.
Okay.
So we have to look at some of the things from the past that has accumulated in that person. And as people start working on this, they're like, "Holy cow! I forgot all about in 7th grade. I forgot all about what happened." And so all of a sudden, people start remembering a lot of these painful experiences that they've never slowed down enough to be able to connect with, nor did they want to, because it hurts. But we help them to start learning how to heal some of the pain, start to understand why they continue to do this when they know better. We have to help them get connected to their body. We have to help them start recognizing what actual feelings feel like. Mm-hmm. Because I'll have people with tears streaming down their face, and they won't even know. They'll say, "I don't know what I'm feeling." They're so disconnected from their feelings. So they have to start recognizing their feelings, start healing some of the past, and start practicing healthy ways of managing that. I gave an example today in the group, actually. I said, if you want to go work out, you got to if you want your muscles to get stronger and you want to get buff, you have to experience some discomfort and some pain. You have to experience burn. It's the burn that makes you know over time this muscle is going to get bigger. Mm-hmm. Everybody here, you're in this program. I don't see you as addicts. I see you as people who are hurting. I see you as sensitive people with a lot of pain.
That makes me feel good when you say that. I mean, that gives me hope.
It levels the playing field.
There you go.
It's not the therapist and the clients. We're all in this together. Yeah. And everybody has addictive tendencies that they can lean into, which is the process addictions. But everybody, our culture is full of process addictions. Yeah. I mean, gambling. We have more gambling, pornography, shopping, workaholism, eating disorders. It doesn't have to be an eating disorder. You can use food in an addictive manner. Yeah. We can get addicted to so many things. You can get addicted to humor. You can get addicted to...
So let's talk. Let's just jump right into this, okay? Because you bring up a really good point. You know, but last time that you and I talked at our little workshop, you know, I was like walking out there and I'm like going, man, I'm grateful to be a drug addict and alcoholic. I can get some help.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
And now we're coming out with, you know, it's being put out there, these new words called process addiction.
Right.
Okay. What is that?
A process addiction is when we're addicted to a process.
Okay.
So whether it's the process of shopping, whether it's the process of gaming with or being on the computer all the time.
Let's come back to that too. I want to talk about that.
So, I mean, if you look at all the things that can become addictive, you can be addicted to cleaning, you can be addicted to reading, you can be addicted to shopping. I hate to mention that. I personally think if it's half price, it's probably not.
I did a show on Channel 8 about shopping addiction. It can make your life unmanageable, and I have seen firsthand women lie. Yes, lie about things that they buy.
So a workaholic, that's a form of a process addiction. So and you can be addicted, this is going to kind of go out there, but you can be addicted to negative self-talk. You can be addicted to shame. It's strange to say it this way. You can be addicted to depression. You can be addicted to anxiety. You can be addicted to your mental health criteria, your mental health symptomology. You can be addicted to that. And I have to be careful because we're talking about all kinds of controversial stuff, and I have to be really careful.
No, because I could sum it up in one thing. Is it safe to say that we're all addicts?
We all have to manage that because we could go down an addictive path very easy, and all of us have addictive temptations we can fall into.
Yes.
Every single person. Can I tell the story?
Yes.
Because it's a sad story, but
I love it. Do it.
It really. I go out and I speak to a lot of different people, and a lot of times my audiences are filled with clinicians and psychiatrists and different people learning treatment strategies for helping people with trauma and helping to heal the pain. But a lot of times I'm talking to people in churches, I'm talking to parents of teenagers, and when you're trying to normalize addiction and mental health, it's proven that to talk about it as being primarily genetic, it's not destigmatizing addictions and mental health. It's just not. We've been talking about that for years. People understand it, but it's not really destigmatizing it because then people like to think, well, that's their genes. It's not mine.
Right.
If you want to destigmatize mental health and addiction, let me tell you a story.
Okay.
Years ago, I worked with a woman, and she came into the psych facility when I was on the private mental health side of things. She came in, and she was probably in her 30s, beautiful woman. Her husband was handsome. They had tried to be able to have a baby. They did get pregnant. They had a baby. He had a great job. They were very wealthy. She was able to stay at home. Life, just looking at this couple, looked perfect. They had the perfect world.
Okay.
One day, she was going to go to the grocery store, and she was leaving, and she thought that the nanny had her 3-year-old little girl. And when she backed out of the driveway, she ran over her little baby girl on her tricycle.
Oh, my gosh.
And she ran over that baby's head.
Oh.
And so this mother jumps out of her car, sees this, scoops that baby up, brains and all, puts her in her lap, drives her to the emergency room.
In her lap?
Yes.
Okay.
And clearly the baby died.
Right.
Now, after that, the woman started drinking. And she started drinking a lot. And by the time her husband came to me and brought her to us, here's how the story unfolded.
Obviously, severe trauma.
Horrible.
Yeah, severe
Horrible
trauma. Okay.
He said, my wife started drinking. She was never a drinker before.
Ah.
He said she started drinking because she couldn't close her eyes at night, because every time she closed her eyes, she could see the image, and she could not make the noise of running over that baby's head leave her ears.
Ah.
So she had PTSD.
Yeah.
And she would drink. He said she went from half a bottle to 2 bottles a night just to try to get some sleep, just to try to stop the pain.
Make the pain go away.
And so when I share this story, and I go into graphic details, because first of all, none of us know that we're not going to have something tragic to us. None of us are guaranteed not to have something painful and tragic happen.
Right.
But I go into the details because I need people to connect with the pain of me just telling that story. I mean, just hearing it, you can totally understand. And so when I get to this point in my lecture and I say, how many of you sitting in this audience, if that were you, and let's say you've never had a drink, and a lot of you in the audience may never have had a drink, how many of you can understand or maybe even see yourself drinking to escape that horrible image and sound?
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody raises their hand.
Absolutely.
So they took this lady to a rehab center, and they said she's got to get sobered up. So they sobered her up.
Oh, my gosh.
She wasn't drinking, and she had a psychotic break. And while she was at the rehab facility, she went completely psychotic. And so they brought her to the private psychiatric hospital where I was working. So that's where she comes into my life. Now, it wasn't hard for me to figure out why this lady had a psychotic break. She had a psychotic break because the only thing that she was using to numb out that pain was alcohol. And when we take the alcohol from her, the reality of what she had actually been through was so horrific, she couldn't afford to live in that reality anymore. So her mind just went someplace else. It's not hard to understand. Any of us could fall into this
Yeah.
if we're traumatized or wounded enough. Any of us
Yeah.
could experience. And you wouldn't say to yourself, oh my goodness, when she had that car wreck and ran over that child, I know what happened. Her alcoholism gene turned on.
Ah.
We wouldn't say that. That
No.
sounds kind of, it's clear. We all see what's going on
No,
and what caused it. Now, and it's the same for mental health. It's not like, oh, when they got the alcohol out of her system, oh, her psychotic gene kicked in. So it doesn't make sense to talk like that in those ways.
Right.
We can see that it came from that trauma, and her little old mind just couldn't take knowing what she had accidentally done. So her mind went someplace else to try to manage it. None of us are above it. And what's so amazing to me, so people say, well, what do you think about genetics in this? Do you think it plays? I'm like, well, absolutely. What's something that's kind of coming out that's interesting is 20%, they have shown, 20% of the population is what we call highly sensitive people.
Okay.
And these are people that feel things very deeply.
Okay.
They experience, and sometimes they even kind of have paranormal or sometimes people call them empaths, where they can almost feel other people's pain. So these are people who have a frequency that they can experience things in a much deeper way, and they feel things in a much deeper way. So you take someone who's highly sensitive, and if they're stuffers, if they don't know how to deal with their feelings, and they stuff them in,
Right.
okay, so that's a bad combination, right?
Right.
Then add on top of that something traumatic, well, that just makes the stuffing even greater.
Yep. You're going to pop.
And then add stress in your adult life.
Mm-hmm.
That's in Melissa's mind. That would be the formula for mental health and addiction issues.
That's my story. Yeah, that's my story. And then what I would do is I would go through so many different process addictions until I found my drug of choice, And so what I've learned, I love what you're saying, and I think a lot of us can relate, because what I have learned, that I would try all these different things. I remember as a kid, I would make myself faint on purpose.
Aw.
I would go faint on purpose to try to change the way I felt. To try.
Really?
Yeah, I
How
did that a
old-
lot.
how old would you
I
say?
can't remember. I was 10 or 11. And I had good parents. I mean, they did the best
Yes,
they could.
yes.
You know what I mean? So it was, but I had trauma that I was dealing with.
Well, that was your only way to kind of turn off.
Right. I was trying to turn off, and of course, but I remember growing up, and now I look back in my childhood, and that's the great thing about it, is I look back into my disease, my dark side, whatever we want to call it,
Right.
seeing all these patterns of it. And I used to buy stuff. I used to overspend. I was a gambler. I was doing everything I could to make the pain go away.
Yes.
And the only thing that would kind of work was drugs and alcohol.
Right.
I could literally self-medicate. I couldn't do it with gambling and shopping. I couldn't
Right.
self-medicate. I need a higher dose. Right?
Right.
And so I get it. So once I found that, where the pain went away and subsided, then my life got unmanageable. And then guess what? I started creating problems as a result of drugs and alcohol, which is pain. And to make that pain go away,
Yes.
make those problems
starts
go
to
away,
feed itself.
I would drink more and do
Yes.
more drugs.
Yes.
And then I end up in a place, a Healing Springs Ranch, for me, prison.
Right.
And the great thing about prison for me is that the pain got so bad for me, it took a spiritual awakening for me to finally recognize and get honest and address the pain head on that I still work on today.
Yes.
It's a daily basis. Working with John Edmondson, he's
Yes.
been a huge help for me and you and the residents. The residents at Healing Springs Ranch have helped me so much because I get to give back.
Yes.
I can relate to them. I get it. I get it, and I know where they're at, and that's what the power of psychotherapy,
Right.
group therapy, and how powerful that is. So I love what you share on this and everything that you say on that. You said something also, I'm shifting gears on you. You talked about Just Hit the Press, a new study on the brain. They did a deal on the brain about opiates, and it lit up a certain way, and then they did it on something, and it's the new epidemic that's stimulating the brain.
I know what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, this is
So,
really good.
Gosh, I'm glad that came.
News alert.
You were making me nervous.
No. I knew
remember
I'd
that.
get you. I was teeing you up. You see that? I start feeding it to you until you bite.
Well, you got to remember, I have menopause, so you may have
That's
to feed
okay.
me more.
I feel like I'm
in
getting menopause.
So this was actually a study that came out probably about, oh my goodness, let me think. 6, 7, maybe about 8 years ago.
Okay.
And so they talked about that. I don't know how they did it, but they measured the excitability of the brain and addiction.
Okay.
And they showed that methamphetamine is the highest, showed the greatest excitability on the brain. When it was measured, methamphetamine was at the top of the list.
So for people who will be listening to us on the podcast and watching us, I'm painting the picture. You have the brain here. You put methamphetamine on it, and it starts glowing like a light. The pleasure center, right?
Yes, and the excitability is...
That just starts off the charts.
That's the highest you can get is with meth.
Okay.
Then they showed what trumped meth on measuring the excitability of the
brain. So you're saying it can go higher?
Yes.
Okay.
Was pornography.
Pornography. There's no way it can go any higher, right?
And they showed what trumped meth and pornography was gaming.
Gaming. Wow.
That is scary because we've got 8-year-old kids, 5-year-old kids at the height of excitability on their brain. Like, what is left, Michael, after that? What is left if that is at the top? So we are affecting our brains, we are affecting our chemistry, we are affecting our anatomy, and we don't even realize it, and we're just blindly doing it without realizing it. When it comes to, if back at Healing Springs for a minute, when I'm talking to the community, and I'll say to them, guys, there's nothing wrong with you intellectually. You're not in here because there's an intellectual problem. I said, I wish we could call this place ESU and just call it Emotional State University. Because all you're here, I mean, we go to college, we go to trade school, we learn things, we educate our minds to understand things. But everybody in the room, all they need help with is how to manage their emotions. And so we joke about it and say, this is ESU. You're just coming in for a mini-master, and you're going to be here for a 30-day or however long.
Right.
And you're going to learn who you are, how you manage your feelings in a healthier way, how to clean up some of the stuff from the past that you didn't think was bothering you, but that it does.
Right.
And so those are the components of treatment, is dealing with the past pains, dealing with how to connect with your feelings now, because when you struggle with addictions and chronic addiction and chronic mental health, there's a disconnect between mind and body. Mind and body have disconnected. And so we've got to bring those two back. And so we have a lot of groups that appeal to the body, so like anger management, art therapy, music therapy, psychodrama, equine therapy, yoga, mindfulness with John.
Into the rock group.
Yes, absolutely. So we want people's bodies they have to get physical. To just sit and talk to someone who's already disconnected mind from body. If you just sit and talk, you're just appealing to this, and they can stay up here. You can intellectualize as a way to avoid all the feelings in here. So there's a lot of people that stay up in their head and they explain, and some of those folks can teach classes. They know this stuff. They're like, Melissa, I know everything you're teaching me. But they've never gone here. They stay up in their head. So they're addicted to intellectualizing. And then you can have people who are in a flap all the time, and they're all reactive, and they're all in their bodies, and they stir up drama and chaos, and that's how they've lived their life. They're addicted to the drama, and they're not really grounded here. So I'll ask people, are you more logical, or are you more reactive? And most people can tell you, oh, I'm way more logical. I said, you're going to have to work on getting connected with your body and your feelings. And it's so funny because the logical people that need to get connected to their bodies are the ones that say, I don't want to go to art therapy. Are you kidding me? Seriously, crayons?
Right.
No. Psychodrama, equine therapy. It's like their mind.
It's a horse.
Their mind poo-poos it.
Yeah.
Because it's where they really need to go. The answer's in their body. So they're not going to want to go do the stuff that has to deal with their body.
Interesting.
And the people that are who maybe are a little bit too dramatic, who are too into their bodies, they hate cognitive therapy. They don't want to just sit around and talk about stuff. We tend to not want to do what we need the most.
So there's different roads to recovery.
Yes.
There's different roads.
Yes.
So let me ask you a couple of questions about recovery, long-term recovery. I've been taught, why is it so powerful and with one alcoholic working with another? Why is that so powerful? Why is that so successful?
Well, number one, I would say is connection.
Yeah.
It's and I don't know if you've seen, there's a lot of people that say the opposite of addiction is not sobriety.
It's connection.
It's connection.
Yes.
And there's so much truth to that.
Yeah.
And whenever you can say, this isn't about you being a person with low morals or poor character or something's wrong with you. This is about you wanting to get away from pain.
Right.
And when you start talking about pain and you level that playing field,
right,
that's connection.
Right.
So when a therapist is sitting with you and they can feel that pain and you're sharing that with that, and that person's there and puts their hand on your shoulder and they help you start to deal with that pain, that's connection.
Yeah.
We connect in those moments of pain.
And this connection can work on the other side too. Let's talk about the family.
Yes.
This is we call it the family disease. The alcoholism, just for the show's sake, let's talk about alcoholism, drug addiction, process addiction, anything that's got my life completely unmanageable and I'm powerless over it, right? I'm lying and I'm stealing from my own mama. I got a problem, right? So, but we also have family. We have loved ones who are just as sick as I am. You know, they can be just as sick as I am. How do we address them? How do they make the pain go away? I mean, how do we address their pain?
Well, first of all, when we do these family intensive weekends, one thing that I talk about with the parents and the families that come in is you have your own secondary PTSD. Watching your son, your daughter, your husband, your wife, who you love, circle the drain, you're trying to save them from themselves, you're trying to prevent their early death. That's traumatic for families. That is horribly traumatic. It's a helplessness. Families get desperate. And so there's just kind of this ripple effect. But even before it gets to that point, I help the people that are sitting that come to Healing Springs. I say, listen, you're the identified person to come here. But what I've learned over the years is that probably there's a lot of pain in your family. And as we talk and we get parents out there, I'll have parents that will say to me, you know what, my son's 35 years old or my daughter's 50 years old and she's here in your program. As you talk about pain, I never shared my pain. I never told my child about my pain, but I was raped when I was 17.
Come on.
Or my father was an alcoholic and I had to go get him out of the bars and walk him home every night. They have their own pain. And what I've learned is that this multi-generational pain gets passed down, and they may never even said a word. But the kids, if they're highly sensitive, which if you're struggling with chronic addiction and chronic mental health issues, there's going to be a highly sensitive person who stuffs things down. So even if the mama never said to her 25-year-old daughter she was raped, that girl has picked up on some kind of energy from her mother that's not settled.
Right.
I had one young lady, and she came to my private practice. She was 16, and the mother said, honey, I'm going to wait for you in the lobby. And she said, okay, Mom. And she came into my office, and she looked around, and she said, help me. And I said, oh, my gosh, what's wrong? And she said, my mother's driving me crazy. She said she signed me up for karate when I was 12 years old. I have to practice my karate moves all the time. Right. And she said, anytime I leave the house, we have to practice the karate moves if someone were to attack me. She said, I get it about safety, but this is like overkill. And now that I've dated, it's 10 times worse. She makes the guy come in, and they have to practice, and she wants them to see that I know karate. So I have to practice these self-defense moves in front of my dates. She said, they joke at school, they call me Karate Kelly. I don't want to, nobody wants to ask me out.
Right.
And she was so upset, and it was kind of comical. So I get the mom in, and the mom starts talking to her, and she said, Mom, everybody makes fun of me. I don't know why you're doing this. And the mom looked at her and said, because I was raped on my first date when I was 16.
Wow. And
so once she had the daughter's like, oh, my gosh, why didn't you tell me that?
Wow.
I just thought you were losing your ever-loving mind. Why didn't you tell me that? So now this is an obvious, I'm giving this story because it's so obvious.
Right.
But it's not always that obvious.
Yeah.
There's unresolved woundedness that gets passed down. And even in the Bible, and I'm not trying to get preachy, but in the Bible, it talks about, I'm not going to get it exactly right, but the sins of our forefathers are passed down for, I think it's 7 generations.
Yeah.
And I used to think, well, that's a bummer. If my great-great-great-great-grandfather was a horse thief and I have to suffer, that kind of sucks. That's not exactly fair. What I think that means is the pain that's never been dealt with, the hurts, the woundedness, and we're calling it sin, but if it hasn't been dealt with, that pain gets passed down from generation to generation. Because even in an attempt not to let them know, if we're not settled in ourselves,
right,
our highly sensitive children pick up something's not right.
Right.
And then they start carrying that burden of their mother or their mother's mother.
Because it was the tools that were given to us.
Yes.
Right.
And the parents are the ones that teach us, for the most part, our parents or caregivers, teach us how to deal with our feelings. We're not born knowing how to manage feelings.
Right.
We have to be taught.
Right.
My daddy is 86 years old, and his daddy died when he was 7. He comes and listens to me present, and he said, I'd love to hear this stuff because, honey, when I was growing up, I lived during the Depression. My mother had to work. I didn't have a daddy. We just tried to survive. He said, we just had to have food on the table. We didn't talk about our feelings. He said, we just kind of had to sweep them under the rug, and we never talked about them. His mother wasn't bad for doing that. She did the best she could.
Right.
But he didn't get to learn what feelings were or how to connect with his feelings. So it doesn't have to mean somebody's bad or parents do the best they can. We do the best we can.
With the tools that we have.
Yes.
And then, whenever I share my story and I'm doing my speaking engagements, I always say this is part of recovery, that in my world, I make it very simple, very clear to the audience. I said, listen, I'm not unique. Okay, I have my story, but I'm not unique. I'm a recovering drug addict, alcoholic. I'm not the person that I used to be, but I want to be really clear. I drank and did drugs because of the effect. Mm-hmm. I didn't drink and do drugs because I was raped, molested, I was dealt a bad deck. I drank because of the effect. It made the pain manageable and went away. That was my solution. Mm-hmm. There are people out there that have the same trauma, and they make the choice to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Those stories do exist.
Right.
That they don't go down the dark road, and I can't relate to that, but they do that because the power of getting honest and asking for help. Mm-hmm. Getting connected. Mm-hmm. Getting connected when it happens, and I didn't do that. I did get connected. I got connected with drug dealers and bartenders.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, and that was your connection.
That was my connection.
And that's why it had a lot of power.
That was my connection, and it had a lot of power. So what a great show this has been. Wow, it's just flown by. We got to touch something real quick. We're going out of town.
Yes.
We're going on a trip.
Yes.
Pack it up. So we're going to Charleston, South Carolina. We're taking the team. We got Rachel Graham. Mm-hmm. We got yourself, myself, Rachel Stacy.
Yes.
Rachel Stacy's going. That'll be a hoot. Getting the three of y'all together, and everybody. We got Chris, and we got a whole crew going to Charleston, South Carolina. Why are we going? What's going on?
Well, Rachel Graham, who is the president of Healing Springs Branch.
Yes.
She and I both have been asked, and she's going first. I'm going to let her go first. We have been asked to do TED Talks.
Yes.
And so it's a long process you really have to go through. And so she has been chosen to do her TED Talk there, and we're all going to go together for her to do her TED Talk. And her, as the president of HSR, her mission too is to help to have wonderful support for people who struggle with mental health and addiction. So we're trying to we want to raise the bar for what good treatment looks like. We want to be industry leaders and say, look, let's take what's working, but let's make it even better. Right. What do we do to make this even better? So she's going to go and she's going to share her story because she has a personal story with a loved one that struggled with addiction.
Right.
And she's going to do her TED Talk. And so it's a little nerve-wracking, but it's exciting at the same time.
Well, we're going to have so much fun. I'm so excited to do that. And just like we're going to have a great time. And for all of the followers on M2 The Rock, we'll be going live from Charleston, South Carolina.
Yes.
Not during the TED Talk, but in the lobby, the hotel, the airport. And we'll be having some fun times in Charleston, South Carolina. Congratulations to you and Rachel for this, and it's going to be a great event. It's just going to be awesome. So, and just to wrap up, if you have any questions, we've got the links in the comments. Everybody who's watching right now, hashtag HSR for Healing Springs Ranch. We had a really big following there earlier. Thank you so much for everyone who has watched the show today. Back tomorrow night, Amara Durham in studio. I want you to check this out. Amara Durham, she is a concierge in recovery, so she helps perform interventions. She gets them to treatment, and while they're in treatment, who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to feed the dog? Who's going to take care of everything? And she comes in and takes care of everything.
I know her personally.
Oh, you do?
She's phenomenal.
Okay, good.
She knows her stuff. She
understands.
understands how to help the family because it's.
Did I say that right? What she does?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
But she does so much more. She does that, but she follows because she's referred clients to us.
Yes.
And she follows them through while they're with the treatment. She helps the family. So what she does is she builds the bridge with the family while the loved one's in treatment, and it makes the treatment so much better. So
Amara Durham, y'all want to tune in tomorrow night, and you know how we met. So I used to coach her sons in soccer. It's just such a small world. And so her boys and my boys played together, and it's just so good. And seeing her again, and her being this is like the third time she's been on the show, and she is just gives me so much hope. You know, it creates that connection back to the kids. So, well, we gotta wrap this up. We will see you tomorrow night. Once again, Melissa Caldwell-Engle, clinical director, co-founder of Healing Springs Ranch. So passionate. Thank you so much. I mean, what you do to help people, I see you. This is the person that you see at Healing Springs Ranch. Even more cranked up, very passionate about saving lives and helping others. I got 3 words for you guys and girls out there. I got 8 letters, and it's got one meaning, and that is I love you. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Healing Springs Ranch is designed for people that really want to come and do the work, and not just work on their addictive behaviors, but going deeper and finding the underlying issues and sharing them, and oftentimes for the first time sharing them out loud, kind of dumping out everything that's holding you back. And in the process, what we try to do is nurture and heal that particular wound while they're here. We really wanted this to be a transformative experience for people, not just a drying out place or a place where they go and check off a box. We truly wanted this to be an opportunity for everyone to take a pause in their life and figure out what they need to do to go live their purpose. So we're very passionate about folks finding purpose and meaning to why they exist, and finding ways to utilize that purpose and meaning for them to go on and actually have a more successful and happier life.